I think this is the first time that Catherine appears on the program, and I want to take that opportunity to say how important a role she plays in the initiative on cities and in creating this event. The title Executive Director is somewhat ambiguous. It perhaps implies to some people that it's an organizational responsibility, but I also want to make it clear that Catherine is an intellectual partner and has played a key leadership role in creating this event. So I very much appreciate the role that she plays in the initiative on cities and in this event in particular.
Thank you, Graham, for the very gracious introduction. As Graham mentioned, I'm Catherine Lusk. I had the pleasure of meeting many of you last night, and I look forward to meeting more of you today. It's interesting that Ali, and I just want to thank, I don't know where he sat down, I want to thank Ali for his perspective and for joining us today, and particularly as an engaged BU alum, we're always thrilled when we have opportunities both to invite him, but also to invite BU alums. And thank you to Mayor Dean, and to Shana, and to Aisha, and to Monica, and to Kate, and everyone who had a hand in putting this together. And certainly to our team, Connor and Patricia and Graham. We really are very fortunate here at BU to have a great team to put together. I was thinking it was fascinating to me that Ali spoke about values. And I think I'll just say very briefly that personally and professionally, this event is very much a reflection of my values, and it's really gratifying to be able to put it together. Professionally, I had the pleasure of working for Mayor Menino when he was towards the end of his administration, and it was really a privilege to work for someone who had such a strong value system and such a strong belief in inclusion and equity, and he would often say that he was mayor of all the people. And I thought, that's a guy that I want to work for. And it's really gratifying as a resident of Boston to see that Mayor Walsh very much carries on that same spirit of inclusion and equity in the city. Speaking more personally, my husband is an immigrant from South Africa. We chose to live in Boston because that's part of our value system, to live in a diverse community. Right on our block, across the street, our neighbors are Jamaican. Next door, our neighbors are Bosnian immigrants who fled the war, first to Germany and then to the US. And behind us, our neighbors are American and Dutch. So it's really rewarding for us to live in a neighborhood where we can sort of live that value system, and our son can grow up in a community where that's normal. We're having neighbors from all over the world, having my husband's also of Croatian heritage, having him sort of speak over the fence to our neighbors who are Bosnian and speak in Croatian, that's just a normal part of growing up, and this is a normal part of his community. So thank you to all of you for the work that you do. Thank you for living this every day in your work. It's very important to me, as I said, personally and professionally. I have the pleasure of introducing the next conversation. Monica Fuentes and Kate Brick. Monica joins us as the director of the Washington Office for Welcoming America. Before joining Welcoming America, she served as the Chief Service Officer for the City of Atlanta under Mayor Kasim Reed, who we know well. And Kate Brick is the Associate Director for State and Local Initiatives for the Partnership for a New American Economy. The screen is going to come down. Look at that. Right on cue. Look, there is a screen. Isn't this neat? There's a screen in here. And they're gonna share their perspective, certainly as ongoing partners and really committed partners to this work. They're going to talk about building a national network of welcoming cities. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kate and to Monica, and they'll lead the conversation unmoderated and take questions because they're certainly well known to all of you. So thank you.
Good morning. I am Monica Fuentes. This is Kate Brick. We are going to attempt to tag team this presentation. Hopefully we'll breeze through the PowerPoint pretty quickly and leave plenty of time for questions. So, Welcoming America. We are a national nonprofit. We work with about 100 communities across the country to build a network of best practices and policies in creating more immigrant-friendly communities. How many people here are part of our network? So it's pretty awesome. As Catherine mentioned, I used to work for Mayor Kasim Reed, and I got to know Welcoming America during my time in City Hall. And he had approached me about wanting to do an immigrant integration initiative. And I got connected with Welcoming America and started drinking the Kool-Aid regarding cities. And really that power of cities and how you all are the ones who are able to change the lives of people in their everyday living. Working for city government I thought was so much fun because you have a scope of influence. And in this case in particular, you get to affect how people interact with your city, how they feel about opportunity and prosperity, and where they want their families to grow up and live. So, since so many of you are familiar with Welcoming America, I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but our model is really this idea of the receiving community. So we use this analogy of the seed and the soil. So the seed being the immigrant, and the soil really being that receiving community, like the local governments, the businesses, and the neighbors that are already there. The idea being that if you don't engage the soil and if you don't make it fertile, the immigrant's not going to be able to prosper. So we really see this idea of inclusion integration as a really comprehensive process, one that needs to be addressed holistically if you really want to see change in your community. So I know we've already talked about Nashville, and I think we'll be talking about Nashville throughout the day. But we do want to thank Mayor Dean for his leadership and really talk about how that's where we got started. So our executive director, David Lubell, was actually in Nashville in early 2000s when Nashville was going through a tough period, as Mayor Dean alluded to earlier. English only was something that the community was talking about. There was a lot of anti-immigrant sentiment. But David was able to approach it from the angle of this is not who we are and building a coalition of folks. And where Nashville is now, under the leadership of Mayor Dean and under the community of Nashville as a whole, really changed the trajectory of this city in the South to really be a model for the rest of the country. So as we were talking about earlier with the English-only bill, it was approached in a way of organizing the community. So this is really where the whole Welcoming America model got started, which was engaging folks, so connecting people from across the community, doing a communications campaign, speaking to shared values and who we are as a country, who we are as a community, and then engaging leadership from all ends of the spectrum. To really create that environment of this is who we are, this is who we want to be, and this is not who we are as someone who does an English-only bill. So following that, there's several studies that have been done, several by PNAE, that now demonstrate that Nashville's thriving. The businesses are thriving, the community's doing a lot better as a whole, and again, just doing the right thing really put the city on a trajectory of being a model for the rest of the world. And so quickly who we are. So we work in about 100 communities across the country, as I mentioned earlier. 1 in every 8 Americans live in a welcoming community, and that continues to grow. Out of the 100 communities, we're with about 70 cities and counties. So our approach, as you all are very familiar with, it's the connect, build, change. So we connect people to build change. So connecting and providing a network. So to Alejandra's point earlier, we can steal ideas from each other because there's no reason to reinvent the wheel. And I think having that model and that ability to share best practices is really what's helping create this movement across the country as we work together to create change. So advanced policies, practice, and culture change. When I was in Atlanta, Mayor Reed was interested in looking at notario fraud, and so I was able to contact Philadelphia and go up there and learn about what they were doing, which was such a neat opportunity to be able to have colleagues across the country to really share in these ideas to start moving policies throughout city government. And then really you achieve whole community benefit. I started to see in Atlanta that whenever Mayor Reed would say something positive, Governor Deal just was too tired. He didn't want to start saying negative things anymore because he knew he had a mayor who was going to say the exact opposite. And that starts to change the dynamic. It starts to change the conversation, and for the positive. So that really looks to that whole community benefit. Again, our approach, You have the leadership. We engage municipal government, businesses, philanthropy, contact. So, people, to break down barriers, it's about getting to know people and realizing we're more alike than we are different. So we encourage folks to host community dialogues and create opportunities for people to really get to know each other and get to know their neighbors and communications. We've had cities like Denver, for example, who's done a huge communications campaign with shared values and showing the joint love of football, and really starting to help people identify that they have more in common than they have different. So the welcoming ROI. So competitive and resilient local economies. Cities are more open and innovative. People are more active in their communities. If they feel safer, it's a benefit for everyone. And communities thrive by being welcoming. So now I'll turn it over to Kate.
Thank you. And thank you to Catherine and to BU for having us here, and Mayor Dean for your leadership. For those of you who don't know Partnership for a New American Economy, we are a bipartisan coalition of mayors and business leaders from all over the country. We were actually started out of Mayor Bloomberg's office back in 2010. And this is a coalition of mayors and business leaders who want immigration reform, are advocating for immigration reform, and also for policies at the local and the state level that reflect the fact that immigrants are an asset to our economy, and want to talk about immigration in a different way. And so a lot of the work that we do is focused around producing original research that's doing just that. It's making that economic casing, showing how immigrants are an asset to communities and in cities and in states that welcome them and create policies and initiatives that allow them to succeed is going to have a direct economic benefit for everyone. And so what I'm going to do a little bit today is sort of talk about this broad economic narrative and then what it actually means in your communities and how we can use some of these numbers to make not only the case for policies that are welcoming, but also how do you start putting those policies together. And Monica and I will talk a little bit about that together in the work that Welcoming America and PNAE is doing together around the country. But just sort of the first entry point that we see, very tangibly in our cities is how immigrants are shaping our populations. And if you were to guess how many major metropolitan areas in the United States grew in the last 40 years without immigrants, how many do you think that would be? Just throw it out there. Yeah, you're exactly right, 0. There were no major metropolitan areas in the United States between 1970 and 2013 that grew without at least 10,000 immigrants coming to those communities. And this is probably not new information for you all, but it really does have an impact when you look at it from that broader scope. And it's not just immigrants themselves, actually. Studies have shown that for every 1,000 foreign-born residents who come to a county, around 270 U.S.-born people will move there as well. And so here are just a few examples of how that narrative plays out in very different communities around the country. In Atlanta, where Monica was, Atlanta is one of the fastest growing cities in the United States. It has the second fastest growing immigrant population. And between 2000 and 2012, immigrants were responsible for 65% of that growth. So Mayor Kasim Reed had a very clear mandate in front of him when he was thinking about making Atlanta welcoming. He knew why, and he knew that this was a huge opportunity to leverage economic growth. In Louisville, Kentucky, not a place that many people would necessarily think about when it comes to the immigration story. And while immigrants are a small percentage of the population there, they're just 5%, they grew during that same period 107%. So this is a community that is growing incredibly fast. There's a ton of opportunity, and we'll talk in a minute about what Louisville is doing in that regard. And then lastly, Dayton, Ohio. And Dayton, Ohio is a very different story. It's a Rust Belt city. It was facing 3 decades of decline in its population. And after a concerted effort by the city of Dayton and their welcoming strategy, they saw that population decline reversed when immigrants grew by 70% over the course of 2007 to 2012. So this narrative, again, different in every community around the country, but overall it's really the same, that immigrants are shaping the demographics of our cities. But they also play a very critical role in our local economies in many ways, but one of which that we talk about a lot is as business owners. And again, you all know this, you work in cities, you know that immigrants are highly entrepreneurial. But one thing that we don't talk about as much is the fact that over the last 3 decades, startup companies were responsible for all net job growth in the United States. And when you think about it, it makes sense. You know, startups are at the very beginning, they're hiring a lot, they're trying to grow. This is their opportunity when they bring the most people on. But unfortunately, we're seeing a steady decline in startups overall in our country. So the source of job creation is slowing down. But again, as you all probably know, immigrants are highly overrepresented when it comes to business ownership, and particularly around startups. So this is a timeline from 1996 to 2011. You see the red line of those that are born in the United States is kind of sort of stagnated, whereas immigrants continue to start new companies. And this really is true across the spectrum from large Fortune 500 companies where immigrants and their children represent 40% of Fortune 500 companies in the United States to the small businesses that we see in our cities. And it's not just small businesses, but specifically Main Street businesses, you know, the restaurants, the mom and pop shops that make our neighborhoods interesting and dynamic. They drive foot traffic, they drive consumer spending. Between 2000 and 2013, the foreign-born accounted for all net growth in Main Street businesses across the United States and in 31 of the top largest 50 metropolitan areas. It's pretty astounding, and this is why. So there were 30,000 less small businesses, Main Street businesses specifically, started by people that were born here, while there were 90,000 started by immigrants, so leading to a net of 60,000. And this is just a breakdown. For some of the cities that are here today, you really see that overrepresentation. The darker blue column on the left is the percentage of the population. The lighter blue column is the percentage of immigrants who are Main Street business owners. So most of these places, it's at least double. And places like Detroit, Baltimore, it's more than triple their overrepresentation in these cities. And so this plays a huge role when it comes to the local economy, to business economic corridors, and thinking about how you want to strategize to make sure that immigrant entrepreneurs are supported and are able to succeed in your city. But beyond business ownership, again, immigrants are contributing in so many ways as taxpayers, as consumer spenders, through spending power, through increasing the value of homes. So these are, again, a few examples from research briefs that we've done in different cities around the country. Salt Lake County, in 2014, foreign-born households contributed $8 billion to the metro area's GDP, $2.3 billion in spending power. In Denver, and Jamie knows this, we worked on this together, in 2013, immigrant households contributed more than $673 million in state and local taxes alone, and they contributed more than $1 billion to Social Security. And then in Dayton, Ohio, which I just mentioned, over the past decade, the increase in immigrants that came to that city, and in many ways as a result of their proactive strategy to welcome immigrants, contributed to an increase of $116 million in the housing value of that city. So this narrative is starting to take off in exciting ways, both in local press, as we produce these studies and we get mayors and business leaders to talk about why this is important, but also at the national level, you see The Atlantic, the National Journal. This is a narrative that's becoming more and more common. And cities understand this too. You know, as Alejandra alluded to earlier, cities know that immigrants are an asset. They know that by being welcoming and by being attractive, as Mayor Dean mentioned, people have a choice of where they live, and you want your city to choose, or you want immigrants to choose your city because they know they're going to be supported and welcomed. So this map is not comprehensive by any means, so don't get upset if your city isn't on it, but it's just to show some of the really exciting initiatives that are taking place specifically through local government. And I'm going to show another map in a minute that's more up to date, and then you should tell us if you're not on that one. But this is just to show you that these are offices where they're actually institutionalized in local government, like many of you are from those offices here today, where they are really making a concerted effort to say immigrants are welcome in our city. There's somewhere in our government where you can go and you can access services in your language. We're going to tell you how to access anything you need. We're going to connect you with the folks that you need to be connected with. And again, just sending this message. So I'm going to turn over to Monica to talk about Dayton and a few other examples.
Thanks. So this part of the presentation is a little odd because we're going to be talking about what the work you're doing, even though you're the ones who are probably the ones who are in the best position to tell us the amazing things you've done. So feel free to pipe in and share and supplement if we're not telling the story as fully and accurately as we should. But as Kate alluded to earlier, Dayton, Ohio is a wonderful example of what happens when you make the decision to attract immigrants and be very intentional about it. Dayton, Ohio is facing a population decline, like many other cities across the Rust Belt. They were struggling, and they decided to create this Welcome Dayton plan. They engaged the community. They went through a variety of community dialogues and really engaged everyone to come up with a plan for the city together. Since then, they are now on a trajectory of population increase. And a lot of that is coming from the foreign-born community. Streets that, business corridors that were empty are now starting to be replenished. So it's a wonderful story and a great example of intentionality. And you see that a lot throughout the Rust Belt. We actually have an affiliate, which is the We Global Network. And they work in particular throughout the Rust Belt with a lot of emphasis on Michigan and Ohio and Pennsylvania to really see how do we rebuild the economies in the cities with a purposeful attraction. So speaking of Michigan, Michigan is actually the state with the most welcoming cities and counties with 13, which is, again, impressive and phenomenal. And we have some people, we have Pam from Michigan, and I know I saw Detroit earlier, which, again, is just a phenomenal representation of work going on across the country. As you can see there, just a listing a few of the Michigan offices. What's interesting about Michigan as well is there's an Office of New Americans in the governor's office, and the governor of Michigan is a Republican. But even he sees the need for being a welcoming state to really make that commitment to the foreign-born population. Atlanta, I'm a little bit biased about Atlanta because I got to be a part of the process. But I think what was really neat about doing this work in Atlanta was seeing the business community really step up. Seeing people like Coca-Cola and Georgia Power want to not only come to the table, but be active members at the table because they knew that for them to continue to be leaders in business, people needed to stay in Atlanta, needed to live in Atlanta, and they wanted to be a part of the change in their cities and communities. And one of the things, I don't think Michelle's here right now, but they've started working on is this multicultural liaison unit. So while they're not able to right now to necessarily hire more police officers, doing an internal assessment of what are the language capacity within the police force as is, and getting the chief of police to sign off on basically creating like a liaison unit. So if there's a problem in the Haitian community, the Haitian officer will be dispatched there, and they are able to have like a new set of priorities so that where folks want to be more engaged with the communities that they can serve, that is a thing that is able to happen. And Louisville.
So a lot of these examples that we're talking about speak to a broader trend of cities starting to really intentionally think about how to become accessible and attractive to immigrant communities. And so the Louisville example is another case of this where the private sector actually played a really large role in their initiative. And we had a roundtable meeting and we launched a research brief that shared some of the data that we showed you earlier about how while the immigrant community in Louisville is very small, it's growing very rapidly. It is highly entrepreneurial. The immigrant community is very well educated, and Louisville, and specifically Louisville's Chamber of Commerce, was interested in how do we attract more international companies and international families to our city. And so together with the Mayor's Office of Globalization, they created this new initiative called Global Louisville, and that's looking specifically at how to make Louisville more attractive to people who aren't there yet, but also how do you make it more welcoming and accommodating to the folks that live there already, so that their successful, and also they start telling their family members and their friends that Louisville is a great place to live. And so this example is similar to efforts that we're going to talk about in a minute that we're seeing all over the country, where a mayor's office is working together either with a chamber of commerce or someone else from the private sector to put together a task force that is looking really intentionally at what the city can be doing. And it's very similar to what we did in Atlanta when Monica was in the mayor's office there. Monica was leading a task force that brought together community leaders, so not just the government. And when we say government, it's not just the people that you would think of. There wasn't an office of Immigrant Affairs in Atlanta before Monica was there. That was created because she got people from all the different agencies that interface with immigrants and who may or may not be talking to each other. All the folks from the CBOs that are actually working with immigrants on a day-to-day basis and understand what their needs are. And then the people in the private sector who have a bottom line. Immigrants are in their workforce. They want to know how to be reaching out to a more diverse consumer base. And so often these are task forces that are multi-sector, and you make sure that all of the relevant voices are at the table. And in Louisville, that's what they're doing right now, and they're going to put recommendations together to the mayor at the end of the year on what that city can be doing. And Nashville, I don't think we need to talk about again, but Nashville, again, a leader in the country, the Office of New Americans, while relatively recently established just, within the last year and a half or so, but Nashville prior to that had the New Americans Advisory Council, which met with the mayor frequently to inform him, and now Mayor Megan Barry on what the needs are of the immigrant community there. And we're really lucky to have Vanessa with us today, who took over for Shauna and is doing an incredible job in Nashville, now working specifically with youth and really empowering youth immigrant integration fellows to be speaking for their own community and to be getting to know who in Nashville they should be working with, and now going to be offering recommendations directly to Megan Barry later in the year on what else the city can be doing. So that's a really exciting initiative too. So all this to say, there is this growing trend, and Welcoming America and the partnership had been working up until now sort of on a case-by-case basis with cities that had either expressed interest or we saw a great opportunity. Typically, we'd been working in places that didn't have the infrastructure that Chicago or Los Angeles or Boston, for that matter, has already, but they have a growing immigrant population. That they may or may not know what that population needs. They definitely don't have the resources yet in government to address them, particularly in some of these places we're seeing in the South, places in the far west, in the mountain region, where there's a large refugee resettlement population. But they were really excited to do this work. And so what we did was, at the end of last year, created an opportunity for cities to apply, not only through the government, but in a joint public-private partnership, to work with Welcoming America and with the Partnership for New American Economy to get the research that you saw us kind of brief through earlier. So 15 communities are going to be receiving these tailored research briefs that gives you sort of the economic and the demographic profile of who immigrants are in your community and how they're contributing. And so how they're contributing to taxes, who they are as business owners, how they create jobs, what role they play in the labor market and in the key industries in whatever that city is. And how you can then leverage that information not only as a tool to inform policymaking, but also as a strategic advocacy tool and why the city should be doing this work. So 15 communities will be receiving that research. 10 communities are working directly with us to receive technical assistance, so we're helping them to put together their own immigrant integration plan. So similar to what Atlanta did and what Louisville is currently doing, getting together leaders from across sectors who represent immigrants and who work with immigrants, but also from the business community and from the agencies that are in city government, to think really thoroughly about what the city can be doing. And so we're advising them in this process of putting recommendations together. Many of you are in the room. Macomb County is one. And then 5 communities were selected actually to receive a matching grant where there was a local, either a chamber of commerce or a specific business or a coalition of different folks who wanted to actually invest in this and see it through. And so 5 communities around the country have actually received a matching grant to help finance this work as we go forward. And this is the list of the first cohort of cities that were selected for this Gateways for Growth Challenge. And they range, it's a really diverse group of cities, not only geographically, but sort of where they are in their immigration story. We're really excited to be working with Anchorage, and Amy is here. So all the way from Anchorage to Birmingham, Alabama, Lancaster, Pennsylvania, Nashville also, and Vanessa is here, New Orleans, San Jose, California, so it really runs the gamut. But we're excited to have this amazing cohort of folks that are in different places, but hopefully by the end of the year we'll have some exciting success stories. And what we would like to do is continue this next year. So if we're not working in your community yet, this is a great time to start thinking about how you can be working across sectors to put together that kind of partnership, because one of the key criteria to be eligible for this award was to really show that public-private partnership. What we've seen in these cities like Atlanta and in Nashville and in Louisville is when these initiatives are successful, they really have support not only from the mayor and leadership in the mayor's office, but also from the business community as well. But for those cities that weren't selected yet, we wanted to make sure that our resources are accessible to everyone. And so just this year, we launched a new interactive website, and I hope everyone will have a chance to check it out. The URL is gatewaysforgrowth.org. And what this is, and this should be representative, so if you are doing something in your community through city government and are not on there, please let me know, let Chelsea know, because we want this map to be completely comprehensive. But what it is a map that shows 3 different tiers. It has all of the cities that are part of Welcoming America on there. Then it has all of the cities that currently have either an Office of Immigrant Affairs, an Office of New Americans, somewhere where it's institutionalized in city government. And then another layer are all the cities that are either currently working on a planning process or have already completed an immigrant integration plan, like Dayton, Ohio, or Pittsburgh, or Chicago. Chicago has an awesome plan. You can ask Adolfo all about it. And so not only are these sort of pinpointed on the map, but if you click on any city, you can see exactly how they did that. So for Chicago, for example, you have the plan itself that's there, but we also have put together a toolkit of best practices for how you start this process in your city. You don't need necessarily someone for PNAE or from Welcoming America there on the ground. There's some guiding principles for how you get the right people around the table, how you frame the messaging, how often should your subcommittees be meeting, sort of this detailed, granular level for people that are interested in pursuing this work in their cities. There's a tool and a best practice guide, so you can get a sense of the landscape, but also get a nice how-to. And we're continually updating this map. So again, if your city isn't on there, please let us know. And then lastly, before Monica and I take questions, I just wanted to make sure people were aware of other resources that are available that have this data. If your city doesn't have its own research brief that's quantifying exactly how immigrants contribute yet, there is a lot of data that's available at the state level. So at the partnership, we have the map, the Impact.org website, which goes every state in the country, and it has a breakdown of how immigrants are contributing in myriad ways by industry, how they're filling specific gaps in the labor market when it comes to STEM fields or filling the nursing shortage. And so you can kind of get a sense of what those talking points are for your state. And we're really excited about launching at the end of the summer. We're updating this map. This information is going to be more in depth and also available by congressional district. And so that's going to be a big piece towards our larger advocacy effort towards immigration reform. And then quickly, just a few other organizations that have great state-by-state data. Immigrationpolicy.org, the Immigration Policy Center has, again, good numbers state-by-state. Then lastly, tax numbers. You can look at the immigrant contributions to taxes, both undocumented and documented, which is nice numbers to have. And that's it for us for now. We wanted to make sure to leave plenty of time to talk to you all and engage with you. So thank you for having us again, and let us know if you have questions.
Hello, Jamie from Denver. My question is about some of the strategies or some of the things that you've seen cities do really well when mayoral administrations change. So a lot of our initiatives are born out of a mayoral office or a mayoral kind of decree. What have been some of the things that you've seen when those administrations turn over be really successful?
So I would actually like to call on people for this one, either Jennifer or Shauna, who can kind of share a little bit about how they prepared for an administration change, if you guys would be so kind.
Shauna?
I'm going to use this moment as a teaser for the remarks I'll be making after lunch, where I will we were asked to answer a number of questions, and I think most of them can be answered best by folks who are doing the important work right now. But the one perspective I have is how to make sure that important work keeps getting done. So again, this is merely a teaser to tell you, I'll tell you a lot. But knowing that it was a very intentional process that involved not just folks in the mayor's office, but lots of cooperation with the nonprofit folks as well.
And I think that's actually one of the benefits of these task forces. So if you are looking at this in terms of doing the work in the mayor's office, but also having an advisory committee, I think part of the hope is that they're also going to be the ones to put pressure on the change of administration, right? Because when everyone else has already bought into it, like, mayors make decisions politically. So if there's folks that they care about that are saying this needs to continue, this needs to happen, the hope is that's going to help continue the work forward.
I would also add to that, I think what has been really helpful, especially in Nashville, and obviously Nashville's a different case because there's been so much positive media attention around who immigrants are in Nashville and how they've helped this amazing trajectory for the city to grow. But even if you don't have the national spotlight and Obama coming to your city, I think it is really important when these efforts are taking place under a mayor that they are recognized and that people in the city and the community know about them. And so when a new administration comes on, people are already excited about it. They've hopefully seen some positive outcomes already to date. And so it's not even a question. Like in the case of Nashville, it really wasn't a question. And I remember that during the mayoral campaign, following Mayor Dean's administration, every candidate for mayor, it was sort of a competition of who could be the most friendly to the immigrant community. You know, we're going to do this or we're going to do that. And Megan Barry had already been, a vocal leader in the immigrant integration and immigrant rights space. And so it was sort of a natural fit for her to come in. But I think just sort of building up that narrative before a mayor takes office is really important too.
I'm going to add from the city of Newark, New Jersey. What we do via the Mayor's Office of International Relations and Diaspora Affairs, the mayor always seeks the cooperation of the city council. So when you're working in tandem with the city council, it makes it a lot easier. So what he did for sustenance is he created diaspora commissions. Presently, we have the Newark African Commission, then we have the Newark Hispanic Commission, and the Newark Caribbean Commissions. So via these diaspora commissions, all the policies that concern the immigrants are sustained because the city council is in cooperation with the mayor.
That's a great point. And there's several cities around the country that have those kind of either ethnic or nationality-based commissions that have a direct line to city council or to the mayor's office to advise them, and making sure that those are sustained across administrations too is really important.
It seems like there's a tremendous amount of positive momentum, but I'm curious where there are perhaps regions of the country that haven't embraced a spirit of inclusion, or where you've encountered communities that are perhaps not as receptive, and what has been successful. If, for example, the mayor's not on board, is the business community stepping up, or are there still pockets of America where this value system is not one that's really shared within the community?
Yeah, I mean, the answer is yes. But I think part of the reason the whole movement has been successful, I think part of, why Welcome to America and PNA does have we're really lucky that we have a lot of work to be doing right now, is people approach us. And I think that's a really important distinction. Like, I don't think we can go into a community and say, you need to be welcoming. It needs to be a two-way street, right? Like, you can come in and start convincing why this is a good idea, but it really needs to be organic and come from the local communities. And I think that's where you see really the success and drive. And what's really neat too, I think, is some of these cities, you see the metro regions also starting to adapt and starting to realize, I either have political cover now, because the big city mayor here has already taken a stance, and I can kind of borrow from that or kind of latch on. So you're seeing more of like the suburban places that surround a city starting to get on board. And I think that's something that we want to encourage and continue. So it's not like going in somewhere where they are completely on the opposite end of the spectrum, but really those who you can change minds and hearts that have started to think about this, and can see the benefits of doing it and doing it now.
Yeah, and I think another piece that we're really fortunate to have is to be able to give this economic framing. And I will say that some of the communities that were selected even for this challenge are already seeing challenges in their community, and they wanted to, some communities when they were selected went out and did press releases right away and wanted there to be a lot of media attention around the fact that they were selected and they're going to be doing this intentional work. Whereas other communities understand that the dynamics are a little bit different, that their people don't know who immigrants are, they may have perceptions of them that are inaccurate, and so they really wanted to wait until we have this research available, and so they're kind of keeping this more quiet until we're able to offer them a research brief that says, these are the people in your community and they're contributing this many $1 million to our state and local taxes, and they're consumer spenders and all these other things. So I think, the timing is really important in knowing how you want to frame it too. But all that said, the economic narrative is important, and it's, I think, more valuable when you can localize it, but people need to, people see and feel it on a daily basis, and you're going to have to attack the receiving community's piece of it too. So I think they go hand in hand, and it's important to not just throw a bunch of numbers at folks and expect them to have that change their entire opinion on immigration either. Yes.
Thank you. You mentioned your work mostly working with cities and mayors. What is your relationship with some interfaith organizations? Do you see any reluctancy with some interfaith organization? Do you have any relationship with this type of organization in your work?
Usually when we work in different communities around the country, one of the most important aspects to this work is the fact that it is working across stakeholders. And so among these task forces, there are always people that are representative of the faith communities and of the different immigrant communities themselves. And so they have a voice in this planning process. So we don't work directly with necessarily the interfaith communities or the CBOs, but they're part of this larger table that we facilitate, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and we have some members who are nonprofits. I think the thing to realize, they're ones who have decided they want to do immigrant integration work, right? So there's a lot of wonderful nonprofits doing great things for immigrants, whether it's legal service providers. But what we're there to support is this idea of integration, and oftentimes what we're seeing is the folks who are taking that leadership role happen to be in government. So not saying that those are the folks exclusively doing it, it's just starting to become the trend. And I think it's partially because that's something local government can do.
Miriam?
So along the lines of what Jamie asked with the transition, Philadelphia recently went through a transition. We have a new mayor. One of the things that we're struggling with, and we were hoping to, I wanted to see if you all knew any best practices throughout the country, is we want to do an advisory committee, commission, however you want to call it, but we're struggling with what model to use and how to really bring in local leaders and also community members to make it be the most effective advisory committee, advisory board for our office. We're a very small office in a really big city, so we want to get the most bang for our buck with whatever sort of group we put together. So I'm just curious to see in your work if you've seen a certain city that has something like that, that's a really great model and they really engaged the community.
I mean, I think you have two people in the audience that can speak to very different cases. Actually, Nashville has this amazing New Americans Advisory Committee. Maybe, Shauna, if you wouldn't mind, or Mayor Dean talking about what that is and sort of what the structure is. And then Louisville and Chicago, they have a very large New Americans task force that put together their plan, but I believe they still have a relationship with the city government too. So those are sort of two different types of examples. If I could put you guys on the spot.
Happy to talk about Nashville. And I should point out Vanessa, who was actually a member of the New Americans Advisory Committee, can speak to it too, because she was on it and now she runs it. But when Mayor Dean started it in 2009, it wasn't started to carry us through a transition, so that was probably a notable difference. But what we wanted to do was open this two-way line of communication between city government and New American communities. And so the important part was not just that we have kind of a representative sample of like, all right, we've got a lot of Burmese people in Nashville, let's get a Burmese person, or that we had, because we wanted it to be small, and so we needed to have decision makers who represented the communities. And so not just for instance, somebody who worked at the nonprofit, but the person who led it. Because we were looking to be able to say, the mayor, to have the mayor be able to say, this is a priority to me, and be able to have them say, in that moment when they were with him, we can do that, or that won't work because X. And again, Vanessa can probably speak better to this, but one of the things that we really wanted to do and just didn't have enough time before we were leaving office, but I think efforts continue to do a demographic map of the city to really help us know who our new Americans are, because it doesn't show up in census data, right? This is a plug for, further funding. Now that I'm outside of it, I can say, wouldn't that be cool if we could do that? But I think once we had a perfect sense, or as perfect as you can get, of these are the communities, we could do an even better job of filling gaps. I know, for instance, in Nashville, the Egyptian community is very large in population, but its leadership is not yet as connected with the city government, or unless maybe I'm speaking, my information is 6 months old, so Vanessa could have made huge inroads there. But I think starting with a good map of who your communities are, then linking in with the decision makers in those communities and making sure those folks serve is one good model to start with.
I think Shauna said something important, which was the folks that were selected to serve knew the mayor meant it, and it was important to him. And I think demonstrating to people who are, because I think you want to bring in those executive directors, those presidents who are the decision makers, and I think they need to also know that your mayor means it, and this is a priority for him. Mayor Reed actually convened his advisory committee. He called every single person he wanted to serve, which meant they all showed up because they had the mayor calling them, asking them to come and sit on advisory committee for him. And I think another way we were able to engage more than just 20 people, we had a 20-person advisory committee, but then we had subcommittees. So if we were talking about access to services one day, that invitation went out to everyone, and they could self-select, right? So rather than that way, I didn't have people in the community telling me I wasn't asked. But I couldn't have an advisory committee of 100 people. That was not going to work. But, if we were talking about public safety one day, if you have something to say and contribute, which many people did, you come to the public safety meeting, and actually you'll be able to have much more concrete recommendations and a hand in this process because we've been able to engage you on the topic that you know well. I think there are a variety of models, and I don't know if Adolfo, he has a mic, so.
Yes, I'm very excited to share. We invited 50 people to be on our advisory committee, and why we think that was a great idea is we have a really large, diverse population. Even with 50 people, I got calls for the remaining weeks of the planning process saying, why isn't our community represented, or why isn't this group represented? So I think one is just knowing going in, you will not satisfy everyone, but creating opportunities for everyone to have a voice. So we very specifically tasked them with creating this plan. Before we even started the planning process, we didn't just sit in a room with 50 people. There was a ton of data research we did to sort of figure out where we are at our departments, where we are serving our immigrant communities, where are some of the barriers and challenges. So we did a lot of baseline data collection. We did a lot of interviews with community members. Even if they weren't members of our advisory committee, we asked them to recommend 3 or 4 people we should talk to so that everyone felt like their voice was included in some way. And we feel like we have a plan that was developed largely in part with community. The reason that was important is we identified both funding sources and departments at the city that would lead the efforts, but we also identified partners in the community that would help implement or go after funding together. So for us, of the 27 different projects and policies we identified in our plan, to date, 25 of them have been implemented in about a 4-year time period. There's no way we could have done it with a staff 4 years ago of 1 person and no budget. There's no way we could have done it on our own. So we relied heavily on our community partners. I think to date we've leveraged over $10 million in funding for immigrant-specific initiatives. And again, that's through our departments. There's no single budget line item. It's making sure we had a really broad base of both our city agencies involved. So that's one of the other pieces. They were sort of the shadow part of this advisory committee, saying, what was possible and feasible, not necessarily giving them a voting choice, because they would say, no, we can't do it because we don't have funding. So they were there more to listen and to respond to some of the ideas being thrown out by community. But we feel like we have a plan that's very representative of community, and we're actually starting the process of updating the plan because we've nearly completed it. 50's too many, though.
Yeah.
What we did, Mayor Ras J. Baraka, upon his sworn in as mayor of Newark, New Jersey, he established, well, first we found out that we only had one diaspora commission, which is the African Commission. And we did a study, and we found out that by having the commission, they made a lot of contribution. It increased participation of the African immigrants in city, politics and all that stuff. So the first thing he did was he created the Caribbean, Newark Caribbean Commission and the Hispanic Caribbean Commission. Now we're working on the Asian Commission. And with all these commissions, they help us. They are the advisory committee, and they bring policies that that affect them. So now we've seen increase in participation in what the city government is doing. We've seen people come out. We've seen people really come to like city council meetings and all that stuff, immigrants. So by having this commission and then we also have the ethnic-based foreign organizations that also work with us to get the message there, outreach and all that stuff. So that's, by doing all this, I believe a membership of the commissions is derived from different countries and different demographics of the ethnic residents of Newark.
Great. Probably have time for one or two more questions.
I'll say this briefly. This is more lessons learned for myself, that in case this is helpful perspective. When I worked for Mayor Menino, we led we wanted to become the first city in the country to achieve pay equity for women. And so we actually created a similar collaborative governance model, enlisting women business owners, small business owners, folks from universities, and putting together an advisory council. But some of the things I learned from the mayor, in case this is helpful to you all, don't rule out sort of inbound interest. So he actually announced the desire to create the Boston Women's Workforce Council in his State of the City address before we created it. And what was really interesting was that women in particular stepped forward really to say thank you and holy cow, and can I be a part of it? And it was really a nice moment where, the mayor had been mayor for 20 years, right? So he knew a lot of people in the community, but we kept track of every single inbound communication we got and looked at those women to say, who are these people? What's their record in the community? These are people who are stepping up and proactively coming forward, and many of them wound up on the council. In addition to which, having a dedicated staff member who was me, who led the work of the council and really pushed them forward, and also creating a sense of urgency. So really putting everybody on a timeline to say, this is when you're reporting back to the mayor. We did many of the similar things that you guys touched on. Monica, the mayor made all of the phone calls himself, everyone from a small business owner in Charlestown to the former head of the Federal Reserve Bank, who was well respected in the business community, who was our co-chair. And continues under Mayor Walsh doing this great work. So I think don't rule out inbound, have a dedicated staff person, certainly diverse representation, not necessarily representing we were trying to represent women, right? I mean, that was half the population. Mm-hmm. But what we really needed were women who were either respected in their neighborhood or respected in the business community, or, and I can say this because we can edit the video, the mayor said, she's going to be a pain in the neck, but she'll have great ideas. And so bringing those people to the table who are really noisy and kind of a pain in the butt, but the kind of person who are going to bring really good ideas and really good perspective to the table, even if they don't represent some constituency, but they're someone, if you're coming up with a new line of thought and a new strategy, they're still the person you want in the room because you want to co-opt their ideas and make them part of the process.
Hi, just wanted to mention one thing out of Denver, and a combination of some of the comments that have been made, which created a really perfect argument platform for how we created our commission. Really started with data and understanding not just the foreign-born distribution throughout Denver, but we also tapped into our public school system to get the languages spoken in the home. So then we were able to map 12 of the top languages and where our families were speaking them most predominantly. So the combination of those two things helped us take to city council members who didn't think they had immigrants in their district, really understand that every single neighborhood in Denver has representation of immigrants, that they speak this multitude of languages. And if you're not tapped into that community, you need to be. So it definitely helped create this opportunity for us to talk about a new topic with our council members for whom this isn't their loudest, their most visible population in their district. And so there was an advantage there for a lot of our council members, and added on top of that, really creating the distinct conversation about why immigrant and refugee communities are distinct from native-born ethnic and racial communities. We have an Asian commission, we have an African American commission, we have a Latino commission. The question that we were often posed is, how is this different from what those commissions can offer? And so that created a really great dialogue for us as well.
Anything else?
We're
Thank
good?
you so
Thank
much
you.
for having us.